He was the policeman who fired the fatal bullet that ended the life of one of Jamaica's most wanted criminals during the 1970s. I speak of Acting Corporal of Police Keith Moss. In a shootout that resembled a cowboy western film, Keith Moss and his colleagues confronted one of the most intelligent and most wanted criminals at Caymanas racetrack on Saturday, April 29 of 1978. When the deafening sounds of exchanging gunshots stopped, the brave Keith Moss lay bleeding and dead. The final bullet he fired, the final act of his police career, ended the criminal reign of 27 years old Dennis Copper Barth. The bullet he fired was swift, targeted, and ripped into Copper's heart, killing him instantly. Though Keith Moss bravely died in the line of duty, he had sadly become the last victim of Dennis Copper Barth. Indeed, Copper wasn't going to go down alone. In his final criminal act, he took the soul of Keith Moss with him to hell. In this video, I look at the death registration form of Acting Corporal Keith Moss to reveal the gunshot wounds that killed him and to look at his personal details. I am Nigel D. Salmon. Welcome to Jamaican Chapter. This is the death registration form for Acting Corporal Keith Moss. I will be looking through this form to reveal the cause of his death, as well as to look at his personal information to understand who he was as a person. I'll start by looking at the top of the form. And at the top of the form it says Death Registration Form, Death in the District of Spanish Town Parish, St. Catherine. Down in the first section on the left, it says Place of Death, and they wrote Caymanas Racetrack. Yes, so we all know, as the famous story goes, he lost his life at Caymanas Racetrack. So as the story goes, Keith Moss and some other police officers responded to an attempted robbery at Caymanas track on the evening of Saturday, April 29, 1978. It was not only the robbery that they were responding to. They were also responding to the presence of Dennis Copper Barth, who was one of the most wanted criminals in Kingston, St. Andrew at the time. A dangerous criminal with a $3,000 bounty on his head. Of course, it was Dennis Copper Barth and his cronies who were attempting the robbery at Caymanas racetrack. So the police were responding to the attempted robbery and also responding to capture this most wanted criminal. As acting Corporal Keith Moss and the other police officers made their way to the location of the crime in progress, they knew they were going against a fearless and merciless wanted man. Copper had created a dreadful reputation. He had created a dreadful reputation that the police officers were fully aware of. He had committed murders, eluded police traps. He had already killed a police officer and wounded another. He escaped from prison twice, in 1973 and also in 1977. And of course, he was known for successfully robbing banks. He was a bank robber and also a gang leader. Copper began his life of crimes from he was a teenager. And according to one police officer who Copper had shot and who survived, he said that Copper, out of his own mouth, said that he began committing murder from he was 9 years old. So it was as if Dennis Copper Barth was born to kill. Anyway, the police team confronted Copper and his cronies that Saturday evening, right after they had already robbed about $100,000 at Caymanas racetrack. Preventing them from leaving Caymanas with the money, the police opened fire. Copper and his cronies were fully armed. Copper was known for carrying a gun, I think it's called an AK-47. He also carried a handgun. So he and his cronies were fully armed. They fired, the police kept firing, and a shootout ensued. It was fire for fire. Acting Corporal Keith Moss, with 9 years of police experience and a member of the Mobile Reserve, took to the front of the gun battle against the heavily armed Copper. Of course, he and another police officer was then wounded by bullets from Copper's gun. Badly wounded and bleeding, Keith Moss and his colleague quickly decided to outsmart the opponent by pretending to be dead. Of course, Copper fell for this trick. Copper, desperate to get away with the cash, believed that the two police officers had died from the bullets that he put in them. He began dashing towards the exit. Then Keith Moss, though getting weak, swung his firearm towards Copper, pulled the trigger, and one bullet flew directly into Copper's heart. Copper's body hit the floor backwards. The bag of money scattered. His dead eyes remained open as if staring at the ceiling. The reign of the most wanted gang leader then came to an end. But just feet away from Copper's lifeless body, acting Corporal Keith Moss himself drew his last breath and died. So clearly, Keith Moss was able to put an end to copper. But as a result, he paid with his life, as copper took him out with him. So there were two dead bodies that were moved to the morgue that day. Copper and Copper's last victim, Keith Moss. It was a sad day. It was a sad day, you know. And what I understand about this story is that nobody, almost nobody, spoke about Keith Moss after that incident. I'm talking about people in the public. Whenever they talk about this incident, everybody spoke about Dennis Copper Barth. And you will read many places where they just said he killed a police officer. Well, in this video, I'm bringing light on who that police officer was. Yes, he was Acting Corporal Keith Moss. Let's continue. I'm going to continue on the left of the form by looking at his personal details before going into his cause of death. So here on his death registration form, it says particulars of deceased. Date of death 29th April 1978. Below that it says full name, and they wrote Keith Moss. Below that on the form it says condition, and they wrote bachelor. So he was a bachelor. A bachelor is a man who is or who has never been married. So, reading from his death registration form, Keith Moss was never married. This does not mean he never had a girlfriend, you know. In fact, he could have been living with a woman at the time. Being a bachelor does not necessarily mean you are single. It just simply means you are not married. From all available information, he never had children either. When his death announcement appeared in the Gleaner obituary on Saturday, May 13, 1978, there was no mention of him having a child or children. His obituary in the Gleaner reads, and I'm reading it here, it says, Keith Moss, Acting Corporal, late of Mobile Reserve, died on Saturday, 29th April 1978 under tragic circumstances. He leaves mother Gertie Moss, father William, sisters Cynthia, Jeneline, Iris, Sharon, Valomia. Brothers Leon, Oscar, Percival, nieces, nephews, other relatives and friends. And it goes on to say, body lies in state at Dewan Vale Baptist Church at 2 p.m. on Sunday, 14th May 1978. Funeral service at 4:30 p.m. Then to the Dewan Vale Cemetery for interment. So obviously, there is no mention of him having a child or children. Dewan Vale, where he was buried, is a rural community in Trelawney. Yes, very rural. Many of you might have heard about it because Jamaica's longest living citizen came from Dewan Vale. Alright, let's continue on the farm. So, below condition we see age, and they wrote 29. Below that we see occupation or calling, and they wrote policeman. So obviously he became a policeman, and that seemed to have been his only career. He probably had a lot of passion for joining the police force. From a child, he probably wanted to be nothing but a police officer. Not much information is in the public as to when Keith Moss joined the Jamaica Constabulary Force, JCF. However, at the time of his death, he was described as a member of the Mobile Reserve for the last 6 years. The Mobile Reserve was a special operations unit within the JCF. Let's continue. Below occupation or calling, we see birthplace. As you can see, this section is empty. But I know, Keith Moss was from the community of Dewan Vale in Trelawney. That's where he was born. That's where he grew up. That's where he was from. The fact that he was 29 years old at the time of his death in 1978 means that he was born in either 1948 or 1949. So if he died before his birthday, then he was born in 1948. If he died after his birthday, because we don't know the exact month that he was born. So if he died after his birthday, then he was born in 1949. He grew up with his parents and siblings in Dewan Vale, Trelawney. His mother, Gertie Moss, died in 2001. And his father, William Moss, died in 2005. Both of them were also buried in Dewan Vale Cemetery. Let's move over to the right of the death registration form to see the cause of death of Acting Corporal of Police Keith Moss. So here on the right side of the form, it says cause of death, immediate cause, and they wrote death was due to shock and hemorrhage as a result of injury to heart and lung caused by the projectile of a firearm, and that person or persons may be criminally responsible. Now let's study this cause of death. The first part says death was due to shock and hemorrhage as a result of injury to heart and lung caused by the projectile of a firearm. What is that saying? This is saying that his body went into a shock and that he bled massively as a result of being shot in the heart and lung. Now, when you look at this, you have to think back at what happened in that moment. Now, the official story is that Keith Moss and the other police officer were wounded and that they pretended to be dead in order to trick Copper and get the upper hand. Now, if he was shot in the heart and lung, I doubt he could have time to pretend to be dead in order to shoot Copper. So I'm thinking to myself that Acting Corporal Keith Moss was first shot in the lung. It could not have been the heart. He wouldn't have time to pretend to be dead. When I see this, I'm saying, this is what I think happened. I think Copper shot Keith Moss. I'm not sure what injury the other police officer received. He was not dead, and there is no documents to look at. So this is what I think happened. That Copper shot Keith Moss in the lung first, the lung. And Keith Moss then pretended to be dead. And I think as he got the chance to shoot Copper, that he shot Copper right in the heart. That is how Copper died. He was shot in the heart. And at the same time, Copper shot Keith Moss in the heart. So it was like heart for heart. Because when Copper was shot in his heart, he died instantly. Instantly. Acting Corporal Keith Moss could not have had time to pretend dead. He would have been dead if he was first shot in the heart. So both men shot each other in the heart, and that's when they died. So as I was saying, I think Keith Moss was first shot in the lung. He pretended to be dead. Then he got Copper by shotting him in the heart, and then Copper must have exchanged another bullet and shot the constable, not the constable, the corporal in his heart. But then again, the persons who wrote this death registration form, in the second section of the cause of death, they said, and I quote, and that person or persons may be criminally responsible. So they have the suspicion that Keith Moss was shot by more than one person. And that could have been the case. Copper was not alone. He went to Caymanas Park or Caymanas Racetrack with his gang. He was accompanied by persons who were with him. So one of them could have shot both Keith Moss and the other officer. It's confusing. It's confusing. So those who wrote this death registration form, they suspect that Corporal Keith Moss must have been shot by more than one person. But we are sure that Dennis Copper Barth had shot Keith Moss. But this whole thing where the officer pretended to be dead indicates that he was first shot in the lung and not the heart. Well, of course, persons were criminally responsible. Copper being one of them. Before I end this video, I also encourage you to watch my video on Dennis Copper Barth, where I read his death registration form. So check out that video on this YouTube channel, Jamaican Chapter. It's a very detailed video on the death of Dennis Copper Barth. Thanks for watching.